Something just happened in silence. No breaking news alert, no warning signs. Yet the ground beneath global power has shifted. India pulled a move that nobody saw coming, not even America, the so-called master of strategy. And now the world is scrambling to understand how it happened. This isn't politics as usual. This is not another headline that fades tomorrow. This is the kind of move that changes relationships, reshapes economies, and redraws invisible borders of influence. America believed it held the upper hand, but while it was watching one direction, India acted in another, quietly, boldly, strategically. And here's the twist. This wasn't a gamble. It wasn't luck. It was calculation. A hidden play years in the making, shielded from the spotlight, revealed only when it was too late to stop. By the time Washington realized what had happened, the move was already complete. The shock, real. The consequences, unfolding right now. Stay with me, because in this video, you're not just going to hear what India did, you're going to see how the underestimated player outsmarted the most powerful one. You'll discover why this moment could mark the beginning of a new global order, and why, once again, silence has proved more dangerous than noise. Before we talk about the details of India's actions, we must understand why they matter at all. This is not just about one trade deal, one shipment of oil, or one diplomatic handshake. It is about the balance of global power, a balance that shapes the future of economies, alliances, and even security across continents. When India makes a move that America does not expect, the effects reach far beyond Delhi or Washington. They ripple through Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. And that is why this moment carries weight. Global power has always rested on alignment. Nations form blocks, blocks shape strategies, and strategies create order. For decades, America stood at the center of this order. Allies looked to Washington for direction, while rivals braced against its influence. India, with its size, economy, and growing influence, was expected to fall into this pattern, leaning more closely toward the U.S. and its partners. But India's decision to carve out its own independent path challenges this assumption. It signals that the global order is no longer built only on America's design. Another power is rising, and it is choosing to define its own rules. This matters for U.S. and India ties, because trust and predictability are the foundation of every alliance. Washington sees India as a crucial partner in balancing China's rise. The Indo-Pacific strategy, the Quad, defense cooperation, all of these rely on India moving in step with the West. But when India surprises the U.S. with decisions that go against expectations, doubts begin to creep in. Can America count on India in a crisis? Will India stand shoulder to shoulder when competition with China intensifies? Or will it weigh its options quietly, making choices that suit itself even if they unsettle its partners? These questions are not small. They shape how future strategies are written in Washington. The stakes are also economic. America counts on India not just as a partner in defense, but as a massive market and a counterweight to China's economic pull. If India drifts too far from U.S. alignment, it opens space for Beijing to fill. Trade, technology, and investment flows could tilt in new directions. This does not mean India will suddenly abandon the U.S., but even small adjustments could weaken America's ability to lead. In a world where economic influence is as powerful as military strength, this shift carries enormous consequences. For the broader world, India's choices send a message. Smaller nations watch closely to see how much freedom they have to act independently. If India can say no to U.S. pressure and still maintain good relations, others may feel emboldened to do the same. This challenges the very idea of American dominance. Washington's influence depends on its ability to keep partners aligned. If too many start charting their own course, the structure begins to loosen. That loosening creates room for rivals like China and Russia to expand their influence. Analysts also warn that the symbolic weight of India's independence cannot be ignored. India is not just another player. It is the world's most populous nation, a nuclear power, and one of the fastest growing economies. Its decisions carry far more impact than those of smaller states. So when India makes a move that disrupts expectations, it is not just an isolated incident. It is a signal that the global center of gravity is shifting. Power is no longer concentrated in one place. It is spreading, and India is one of the key reasons why. The shockwaves also reach into security. U.S. military planners count on India's cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, where tensions with China are growing. India's ports, bases, and partnerships are considered critical to containing Chinese expansion. But if India maintains too much distance, the entire strategy looks less certain. America cannot assume automatic alignment. It must now operate with the awareness that India will choose its role based on its own priorities. That uncertainty changes the way alliances are managed and the way strategies are executed. This is why the stakes are so high. A miscalculation in Washington could weaken its influence. A miscalculation in Delhi could leave it isolated. The balance between cooperation and independence is delicate, and both sides know the risks. But India's recent decisions show that it values autonomy above everything else. That message is powerful. It tells the world that India is not a junior partner. It is a sovereign power carving its own destiny, even if that destiny unsettles others. Europe feels these stakes as well. Many European nations have tied their strategies to America's leadership. They support sanctions, invest in defense cooperation, and look toward the U.S. for direction. But when India takes a different path and still manages to thrive, it raises uncomfortable questions in Europe. Are they sacrificing too much to stay aligned? Could they also adopt a more independent stance? These questions are small today, but they may grow louder in the future. And if they do, it could shake the unity of Western alliances. The ripple effect is clear. India's moves are not just about itself. They test the resilience of U.S. influence. They push America to adapt. They inspire others to consider alternatives. And they reshape the conversation about what global power looks like in the 21st century. This is why experts call it more than just a policy shift. It is a strategic shockwave, quiet in its execution, but loud in its consequences. At the heart of it all lies the reality of choice. India's choice to act independently forces others to make choices too. Washington must decide whether to pressure India harder or adapt to its autonomy. Europe must decide whether to follow America's lead or rethink its path. Smaller nations must decide whether to cling to U.S. influence or explore their own space. And China, watching closely, must decide how to exploit these cracks. Every choice is interconnected, and every choice raises the stakes further. In the end, what makes this moment so critical is not just the move itself, but the chain of reactions it sets in motion. Global power is a delicate balance. A single shift in one part of the world can tip the scales everywhere else. India's actions remind us that the balance is never fixed. It is always in motion, always vulnerable to surprise, always open to recalibration. And the fact that America never saw it coming only amplifies the impact. The world now knows that India is a player that cannot be predicted, and that unpredictability itself becomes a force of power. The U.S. misstep began with a familiar weapon, tariffs. In the language of global power, tariffs are not just numbers on paper, they are signals. They tell the world who is in charge and who must bend. Washington believed it could use economic pressure to force India into compliance. By raising duties, by restricting access, by questioning India's trade policies, America expected submission. It assumed that India would calculate the risk, feel the squeeze, and quickly return to the fold. But that assumption revealed a blind spot. The United States has long relied on the idea that its market is irresistible, that no country can afford to lose access to American consumers. This belief has worked with smaller economies. It has worked with nations dependent on U.S. trade. But India is not a small economy anymore. It is one of the fastest growing in the world, a vast domestic market, a rising hub of technology and innovation. Tariffs that might have once crippled India now feel more like an inconvenience than a fatal blow. By treating India as if it had no other options, Washington underestimated how far New Delhi was willing to go to protect its independence. The harsh rhetoric that followed only deepened the divide. American leaders accused India of taking advantage, of buying oil from Russia against warnings, of refusing to align with Western strategies, words that might have pressured allies instead, hardened India's stance. Public scolding rarely works with nations that value pride and sovereignty. For India, the message was clear. The United States was not treating it as an equal partner, but as a subordinate expected to obey. That was the turning point. India does not respond well to lectures. It responds with quiet defiance. When the tariffs hit, and the rhetoric sharpened, India began looking at its alternatives. And here lies the quiet irony. America's attempt to corner India ended up pushing it toward the very players Washington wanted to isolate. Russia and China, once distant partners, suddenly became useful doors to open. With Russia, India saw an energy lifeline, discounted oil, steady supplies, and a chance to soften the impact of global price shocks. With China, the opening was more subtle but equally powerful. Trade flows remained strong, even as political tension lingered. India didn't announce a grand shift, but the numbers began to speak. Imports rose, partnerships deepened, and America's grip loosened. What Washington missed was the psychology of India's choices. This was not just economics, it was history speaking. India has lived through colonial control. It has lived through decades of being told what to do by stronger nations. The memory of dependence runs deep. So when the U.S. raised tariffs, it triggered more than just financial calculations. It triggered an instinct to resist, to find another way, to prove that India would not kneel under pressure. This instinct is not negotiable. It is part of the national identity, and once awakened, it guides every move that follows. The misstep also exposed America's lack of consistency. On one hand, it spoke of partnership. On the other, it treated India as a problem to be managed. Some officials promised trade deals, while others demanded compliance on energy choices. This confusion made Washington appear unreliable. In diplomacy, mixed signals are poison. They create doubt, and doubt is the seed of separation. India, watching this unfold, decided it could not rely solely on American goodwill. Instead, it spread its bets. Stronger ties with Russia, a careful balancing act with China, new agreements with smaller but vital players. By focusing too much on punishment, the U.S. ignored opportunity. Tariffs could have been a negotiation tool, a way to open dialogue and build deeper trust. Instead, they became a wall. And when one wall rises, another door opens elsewhere. Russia welcomed India's purchases of crude oil, even under Western criticism. China, despite its rivalry, found space to engage in trade that served both sides. Washington wanted to weaken India's resolve. What it did instead was highlight India's ability to pivot. The pivot was not dramatic at first. It was subtle. A few more tankers of oil from Russia, a few more trade exchanges with China, quiet meetings in diplomatic back rooms. But these small moves added up. And as they added up, the perception grew. India was no longer bound to American terms. It was free to choose, free to balance, free to chart a course that others could not easily predict. This freedom is powerful, and it is exactly what America never intended to give. The misstep reveals a deeper issue. America often views power through the lens of dominance, pressure applied, results achieved. But India views power through the lens of balance, options preserved, independence maintained. When Washington raised tariffs, it believed it was tightening the leash. In reality, it was cutting it, because once India proved it could survive without unquestioned dependence on American trade, the leash was no longer binding. The harsh rhetoric added insult to injury. Instead of quiet negotiation, it became public confrontation. Leaders in Washington criticized India openly, expecting embarrassment to spark compliance. But this ignored the cultural truth that public shame only strengthens resistance. Rather than bend, India looked eastward, signaling that it had alternatives. The more America pressed, the more India proved it could endure. The consequences of this misstep are already visible. Trade tensions grew, trust weakened, and while Washington insisted it was protecting its interests, the global perception shifted. America looked less like a steady partner and more like a demanding power losing patience. In contrast, India looked like a nation standing firm, unwilling to compromise its autonomy even under pressure. That perception matters because in international politics, image often shapes reality. What began as a tariff dispute became a symbol of something larger, the limits of American influence. Every action taken to push India closer actually pushed it away. Every harsh word echoed louder in New Delhi than Washington expected. And while the U.S. still hoped to draw India back into line, India was already building new lines of its own. Lines connecting Moscow, lines connecting Beijing, lines that gave it leverage, flexibility, and choice. The pivot toward Russia and China does not mean full alignment. It does not erase rivalry or erase differences, but it does mean India now has more room to maneuver. It can play East against West, extracting benefits from both without surrendering to either. That was not America's plan. That was the unintended outcome of its misstep. The story of tariffs and rhetoric is not about economics alone. It is about pride, perception, and independence. By underestimating these forces, the United States weakened its own strategy, and by overestimating its ability to dictate terms, it opened the door for India to move in directions it never saw coming. The pivot has begun, and with every quiet step, the gap widens. India's strategic autonomy is not a slogan. It is a way of survival that has been refined through history. Put simply, it means doing what's best for India, not for others. It means making decisions that protect national interest above foreign pressure. It is not about choosing one side or rejecting another. It is about keeping doors open, options alive, and independence intact. This idea is rooted in India's past. After gaining independence, the country faced a world divided between two superpowers. The Cold War demanded loyalty. Nations were told to pick a camp, America or the Soviet Union, but India refused. It chose non-alignment, a position that gave it space to breathe in a suffocating global environment. That tradition still lives on, though in modern form. Today, non-alignment has transformed into strategic autonomy. The principle is the same. India will decide for itself on its own terms, at its own pace. Strategic autonomy is visible in how India manages its partnerships. With the United States, it engages in deep cooperation, trade, technology, defense exercises, intelligence sharing. These links are stronger today than ever before. Yet at the same time, India buys oil from Russia, weapons from Moscow, and maintains ties that stretch back decades. Even with China, despite border clashes and rivalry, India does not shut the door completely. Trade continues, and dialogue never fully stops. This balancing act is not confusion. It is deliberate design. What makes this approach powerful is its flexibility. If one partner turns hostile, India can lean on another. If one market closes, another remains open. If one alliance fails, new bridges are already in place. This reduces vulnerability and increases leverage. Instead of being locked into one direction, India keeps multiple paths available. For Washington, this can feel frustrating. For Beijing, it can feel suspicious. But for New Delhi, it feels secure. Strategic autonomy also means rejecting simple labels. India does not want to be called a satellite state. It does not want to be boxed into categories like East or West. It wants recognition as a pole in its own right, a center of influence, not just a supporting actor in someone else's story. This ambition is what shapes its decisions. It is why India says yes to some agreements and no to others, often confusing outsiders who expect predictable alignment. The confusion is intentional. Predictability can be exploited. Uncertainty keeps others cautious. The principle extends to energy security. While Western nations urged a halt to Russian oil, India kept buying. Why? Because energy is not a political game for India. It is a lifeline for a population of over 1 billion people. Strategic autonomy means refusing to sacrifice the needs of its citizens for the approval of distant capitals. It means reminding the world that sovereignty includes the freedom to secure survival without apology. The same principle shapes defense policy. India participates in military exercises with the United States, Japan, and Australia under the Quad framework. Yet it also purchases advanced defense systems from Russia. To outsiders, this looks contradictory, but to India, it is balance. It ensures that no single power controls its military future. It avoids dependence while keeping multiple suppliers invested in its stability. Strategic autonomy is not just external, it is also internal. India's leaders know that public opinion values independence. The memory of colonial rule makes foreign control deeply unpopular. No government in New Delhi can afford to appear as if it is bowing to outside pressure. So every decision is weighed not only in terms of diplomacy, but also in terms of national pride. This is why India resists open lectures. This is why it prefers quiet negotiation. Strategic autonomy is as much about psychology as it is about policy. Technology is another area where this principle plays out. India collaborates with American tech firms, but it also invests heavily in domestic development. It imports critical components, yet pushes for self-reliance in production. The idea is not isolation, but independence. By diversifying sources and strengthening local capacity, India reduces the risk of being trapped by foreign leverage. In a world where technology drives power, this autonomy is crucial. Even in global institutions, India's strategy reflects autonomy. It engages with Western-led platforms like the G20, while also deepening its role in BRICS with Russia and China. It supports international norms when they serve its interests, but resists when they don't. This selective participation frustrates those who expect automatic loyalty, but it preserves freedom of action. India prefers to shape the system from multiple sides rather than surrender to one. The heart of strategic autonomy lies in patience. India does not rush into alliances or sever ties recklessly. It waits, watches, and calculates. This patience is often mistaken for hesitation, but in reality, it is discipline. It prevents India from being trapped in commitments that could later turn into liabilities. It allows India to adjust when the global environment changes, as it often does. In a world of shifting power, patience is not weakness, it is resilience. This approach also reflects India's unique geography. Surrounded by nuclear powers, bordering volatile regions, and positioned at the crossroads of Asia, India cannot afford rigid commitments. Flexibility is survival. If it leans too far toward one side, it risks exposure on the other. Strategic autonomy ensures balance in a dangerous neighborhood. It keeps rivals guessing and allies invested. For the ordinary citizen, this principle may feel distant, but its impact is real. It protects access to energy, keeps markets diverse, and prevents foreign dominance from dictating national priorities. It allows India to say yes when it serves the people and no when it does not. This is not abstract theory, it is practical sovereignty in action. Strategic autonomy also builds respect. Just the nations may criticize India's choices, but they also recognize its consistency. Over decades, through different governments, the core principle has remained. That consistency sends a message: India cannot be controlled, only engaged. And in a world where trust is fragile, consistency is power. This does not mean India is without challenges. Balancing so many relationships requires skill. It creates tension. It draws criticism from every side. But India accepts that cost. It knows that dependence on any single power would be far more dangerous. Strategic autonomy is not about avoiding problems. It is about managing them on India's own terms. The philosophy is simple. In a world of giants, survive by staying free. Do business with all, commit to none fully, and always keep the national interest first. That is the meaning of India's strategic autonomy. Not isolation, not neutrality, but freedom to choose, freedom to act, and freedom to decide. This is why, when pressure mounts, India bends, but does not break. It negotiates, but does not surrender. It adapts, but never abandons its independence. Delhi's diplomacy is a game of balance that surprises even seasoned observers. On one hand, tensions simmer along the Himalayan border, where soldiers from India and China have clashed. On the other hand, Indian leaders still extend handshakes, hold talks, and keep the channel with Beijing open. The same pattern is seen with Russia. Even as Moscow faces isolation from the West, Delhi continues warm exchanges, energy deals, and defense cooperation. Outsiders see contradiction. India sees strategy. This diplomatic juggle is not random. It reflects a deeper calculation that relationships must never be allowed to collapse completely, no matter how strained they appear. For India, shutting doors is dangerous. Keeping them ajar, even slightly, preserves leverage. It ensures that rivals remain engaged, not abandoned. This approach allows India to buy time, reduce risks, and extract value even from difficult partnerships. Take China as an example. The border conflict has created distrust and anger. Public sentiment is deeply hostile, yet Delhi avoids declaring China as an enemy in absolute terms. Trade between the two nations continues, billions of dollars flowing back and forth each year. Dialogues are scheduled, meetings arranged, even if breakthroughs are rare. This keeps tension from spiraling out of control. It also prevents China from feeling completely cornered. which could provoke even more aggression. Delhi knows that in a neighborhood as volatile as Asia, dialogue, even thin and fragile, is better than silence. With Russia, the pattern is even more visible. Western nations have distanced themselves, imposing sanctions and cutting ties. But India has taken a different path. It has increased oil imports, taken advantage of discounted prices, and defended its right to make sovereign choices. At the same time, it has not echoed Moscow's rhetoric blindly. Delhi maintains its independent voice, often calling for peace and restraint. This allows India to benefit economically while avoiding political entanglement. It is a fine line, but one that India walks with skill. The ability to juggle comes from history. India has lived through eras when alliances shifted overnight. It remembers when trusted partners suddenly turned distant. This memory fuels caution. Today, Delhi prefers complexity over clarity. It avoids the comfort of fixed positions, instead choosing flexibility. This frustrates allies who want predictable commitments, but it preserves India's independence. Diplomatic juggling also provides bargaining power. By engaging with Beijing despite tensions, India signals to Washington that its loyalty cannot be taken for granted. By staying close to Moscow, India reminds Europe that its friendship is not automatic. These signals increase India's value. Nations realize that winning India's trust requires effort. They cannot assume it, they must earn it. This increases India's weight in every negotiation. At global summits, this juggling act becomes visible. Indian leaders can stand next to American presidents one day, Chinese premiers the next, and Russian officials the day after. Each side interprets these gestures differently. Some see hope, others see warning. For India, it is all part of the same design. It wants to be everywhere without being trapped anywhere. It wants to be included in every circle, but owned by none. The warmth shown to Moscow carries special significance. Russia has been a long-time partner in defense and technology. Abandoning that relationship would create vulnerability. So India nurtures it, even when others criticize. Moscow appreciates the loyalty, but Delhi never allows the bond to become suffocating. It keeps Russia close enough to maintain trust, yet distant enough to avoid dependence. This careful spacing is what defines the juggle. With Beijing, the gestures are even more subtle. Smiles at forums, cautious statements of cooperation, agreements on climate or trade. These gestures create the illusion of harmony, while real tensions remain unresolved. This duality confuses outside observers, but serves India's interest. It reduces pressure on the border by keeping broader ties alive. It signals maturity, showing that India can separate conflict from cooperation. What makes Delhi's juggling unique is its refusal to collapse relationships into single categories. For the West, Russia is an adversary. For India, Russia is a partner in some areas, a challenge in others. For the West, China is a rival. For India, China is a competitor, a neighbor, and a trade partner all at once. These multiple identities create space for maneuver. They allow India to shift roles depending on context. Critics call this opportunism. Supporters call it realism. Delhi calls it sovereignty. The truth is, this juggling act reflects the hard truth of India's position in the world. Surrounded by great powers, caught between rivalries, and dependent on global trade, India cannot afford rigidity. It must dance carefully, adjusting to rhythm changes without losing balance. This approach extends beyond Moscow and Beijing. India builds ties with Iran, buying oil and investing in ports despite American sanctions. It reaches out to Central Asia, cultivating links to regions often ignored by others. It strengthens its voice in Africa, offering aid and partnerships where Western powers hesitate. Each of these moves adds another ball to the diplomatic juggle. It makes the pattern more complex, but also more resilient. Warm gestures toward Beijing and Moscow do not erase tension, they manage it. They create space where otherwise there would only be confrontation. This is not weakness. It is recognition that geography cannot be changed, neighbors cannot be erased, and history cannot be undone. India does not seek permanent peace with rivals, but it seeks to prevent permanent hostility. That is the true aim of the juggle. Even domestically, the policy is explained as pragmatism. Leaders tell citizens that national interests must come first. Anger and emotion cannot dictate diplomacy. It may be painful to see warm words exchanged with adversaries, but it is necessary for security. The people are asked to trust that patience and balance serve the nation better than reckless choices. This balancing act also gives India the ability to act as a bridge. When the West refuses to talk to Moscow, India can step in. When dialogue with Beijing seems impossible, India can still host conversations. This role enhances India's global standing. It makes it not just a participant, but a mediator, a voice that others cannot ignore. The diplomatic juggle is a performance that never ends. It requires constant adjustment, constant recalibration. Every handshake must be weighed, every statement crafted, every gesture calculated. It is exhausting, but it is necessary. Because in the great theater of global politics, standing still is the fastest way to lose balance. India chooses to keep moving, juggling, shifting, always unpredictable, always independent. If you found this breakdown valuable and eye-opening, make sure to like this video. It helps us bring more powerful stories straight to you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next big shift happening in our world. The game is changing and you'll want to stay ahead.